Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Soldiers of Cinema podcast. I'm here with my co-host, Mr. Cullen McFader.
Howdy, howdy, howdy.
Howdy, 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 with my my countrified co-host, I guess.
I'm trying new things out, right?
You're trying new things out, and I'm Clark Coffey, and we are Soldiers of Cinema, and we're happy you're here. Today, in this episode, we are going to be discussing Spike Lee's 1989 film, Do the Right Thing.
Mm-hmm.
Ooh-wee. It's gonna be a scorcher today.
Universal Pictures presents a new film from Spike Lee.
Good morning, Miss Mother Sister.
Now, Mookie, don't work too hard today. The man says it's gonna be hot as the devil.
I've been here 25 years. LaSalle's famous pizzeria is here to stay.
Trust me.
Mookie, the last time I trusted you, we ended up with a son.
I know you can't stand it. You can't stand it.
Hey, Sal, how we gonna brothers from the wall here?
You want brothers on the wall?
Love.
Get your own place. You can do what you want to do.
What I tell you about that noise? What I tell you about them pictures?
You talk to him, brother, talk to him.
You the man. No, you the man.
No, you the man.
No, you the man.
The first time you turn your back, boom. Right here, man, in the back.
Y'all take a chill. You like to sign a petition to boycott Sal's famous pizzeria?
Hear me, what you ought to do is boycott that no-good barber that messed up your head.
And that's the double truth. Rude.
Fight the power. Fight the power.
You know, deep down inside, I think you wish you were black.
Who told you to step on my sneakers? Who told you to walk on my side of the block? Who told you to be in my neighborhood?
I own this brownstone.
Who told you to buy a brownstone on my block, in my neighborhood, on my side of the street?
I can't even hear myself think.
From Spike Lee, director of School Days and She's Gotta Have It.
Good people, please. If we don't stop this, and stop it now, we gonna do something we gonna regret for the rest of our lives. Doctor,
Come on, what?
always do the right thing.
That's it?
That's it.
I got it. I'm gone.
I'm excited to discuss this one. And you know, I'm almost, gosh, I was tempted to like jump right in to my personal, like kind of my personal experience with this film when it first came out. I was 13, but before I do so, I wanna hand it over to you and kind of hear your personal experience with the film. It's kind of how we always like to start. When you first saw it and kind of what your impression was of it and all that kind of good stuff.
Yeah, so my first time I saw this would have been, it was quite an academic kind of thing because I was in school. I was at university. It wasn't in film school, but I was in a film class.
Okay.
Like as an elective.
Yeah.
And so this was one of the, I believe this was, I took like 3 simultaneous film courses, and one was a first year one, like the entry level one, and then 2 other ones were in upper year courses. And I'm trying to remember if this was in the like 101 class or what, but anyhow, it was the first time I'd seen it. I was 19.
Yeah.
And yeah, I remember I liked it a lot. And it's like kind of an interesting, like there's pros and cons to kind of seeing something for the first time like that, because
I bet,
on one hand, you get a pretty good opportunity to discuss it and really think about it and kind of dissect it in a lot of ways.
Okay, now then we're expecting a high bar here then from your side on this podcast, because
I mean, read off of my papers and all that, you know. But on the other hand, I also find that making things super academic can often, at least in my opinion, kind of dilute a conversation. And when you get so far into the like didactics of theory and these like very specific and in some ways strict definitions of certain like film theory elements and or just elements of film in general, that it can kind of limit a conversation. I remember one thing that kind of stuck out to me was describing at one point in the class what I thought was a pretty normal thing as a filmmaker, because I had been making movies before then when I was in this class anyhow, so I kind of already had that side of the experience. And I remember at one point trying to have a discussion about like the filmmaker's intention, about like Spike Lee's intentions. And the professor sort of stopping me and saying, well, we don't really think about the filmmaker's intentions. The filmmaker's intentions are irrelevant. And that kind of took me aback, because I was like, that doesn't really make sense, because I feel like if you're looking at something through a scope where you're disregarding intentions and only looking at result, you're limiting yourself on what you are actually able to take in about whatever work it is. And especially something like this where intentions do matter so much, because there is such a rich like depth to the subject matter of this movie.
Yeah.
So I thought that so on one hand, yeah, it was a good opportunity to kind of discuss the movie and be able to work out the theory and kind of think about it in that sense. But I think having grown beyond that, and grown beyond perhaps the things that I learned and discussed in that class, I think I got more out of it this time, just on the basis that
on like a personal level.
Yeah, like I've grown slightly older, and on these more life experience. The world has also changed quite a bit since then. That was 2017.
Stayed the same in some ways. Unfortunately,
in a lot of ways, things are the same, but also very different. Like, yeah, exactly, good point. So I think you just approach it. I don't know, I don't know if I would feel any different about this if this was my first time seeing it. Like, I feel like I had a pretty fresh experience with it this time, in that, like, I think just because of the distance that I've had, there's obviously a huge difference between 19 and 25, despite the fact that it's not that long of a time.
I would say.
So I just think that on that basis, I think that I had a very fresh kind of experience. Not that my opinion of it has changed much. I've always liked it. I liked it a lot the first time I saw it, and I liked it a lot now. But I think that I think I'm better equipped to have the conversation about this movie now than I was, back then.
Yeah,
all those years ago.
Yeah, that's interesting. It's an interesting thing to think, kind of, how being, kind of experiencing a film in that setting, and it's like, it's part of a class, it's part of a curriculum. You're to some extent, you're having to perform in some manner, I would assume, to earn a grade, right? It's like either your discussion is graded, or you're writing a paper about it, or you're having some kind of test. I mean, there's some way they have to kind of confine your response to it in a way that they can grade it, and so maybe that was part of the limitation of, like, okay, well, hey, look, we're going to arbitrarily limit ourselves to this is in the film, and we're not going to take any context outside of that into account, and I can understand that. But yeah, I would say I can imagine on a personal level, though, kind of having so much structure of the academic experience around it changes it. And I didn't go to film school myself either, but I did take some film classes in college, like you were describing. And yeah, I mean, it's, there were kind of pros and cons to that, for sure, like you just described. So that's interesting to kind of compare that experience to this experience now. And it's kind of interesting that you felt like this was almost watching it anew. For me, it's been a long time since I had seen the film. I think I've probably seen it, I don't even actually know how many times I've seen the film. Not that it's a terribly high number, but probably at least, maybe half a dozen times or so over, all the years that it's been released. But I do, remember watching this film, and I was 13 when it was released. I didn't see it in the theater, so I almost certainly saw it, a year or two later when it came out on cable television, or I rented it. I definitely knew who Spike Lee was at that time. And I mean, Spike Lee was, especially in the United States. I don't know if this is also the case in Canada, but I mean, he was a pretty substantial, like, popular cultural icon, I mean, he was, I don't remember the exact timing of things, but probably by the time this had been out for a couple of years, which is when I would have seen it at home. I mean, he was Mars Blackman in the Air Jordan commercials, which were all over the place. And of course, Air Jordans were insanely popular. And so like, and he was a big part of that. His commercials were like iconic, and his portrayal of Mars Blackman was iconic, which of course was a character from an earlier of his films. And She's Gotta Have It from like I think 86 or so. And so, and he had like really, this film was both controversial, but also, I mean, I think recognized rightfully so as such a superb film, that it was just like it was just he was all over the place, right? So
Hmm.
I
Yeah.
had a context of him as a filmmaker, and as like this kind of I guess you could even say at that time, even iconic would be even the right word to use. This iconic public figure, right? Um, and I mean, I remember watching the film, so I probably was like 14, 15 years old, and I remember watching it and being pretty profoundly moved by it, like just personally, emotionally. It's funny too, I how much I had forgotten when I watched it last night in preparation for this. There were so many memories came back to me of like, you know, thing like the writing is so especially unique in so many areas of this film, that there was just so many things that stuck with that, like I remember, oh my gosh, like that really had an impression on me, but I had
Hmm.
kind of forgotten where that impression had come from over time. And then watching it now, it like reminded me. I was like, oh, it that was from this film, Oh my gosh, that was also from this film.
Yeah.
Just the
Yeah.
iconic characters, the writing, just so many things. Kind of burned into my young, like preteen or young teen brain when I watched this film. And I think it was a big part of, for me, along with a lot of the films that were coming out in that era of like, kind of, now this, I don't think it was an independent film, but this is a low budget film. And it feels very much, honestly, like an independent film to
Yeah.
me, in its like style, and in its the perspective, the strong, like the strong auteur. This is clearly Spike. This is
Hmm.
clearly his vision. This is clearly not a homogenized studio film, and it very much had that feel. And so this, with a lot of films that I think were coming out, and we've talked about some in previous episodes, I think like Kevin Smith's Clerks, uh, Quentin Tarantino's Reservoir Dogs, and Soderbergh was coming out at this time too, and all that stuff kind of started to formulate like my vision of what a director could be and what a film could be, and the range of that, and that you could potentially do this,
Hmm.
that
Yeah.
it like, and that there was room for different voices, different perspectives,
You're allowed
and
to break rules.
that you're, yeah, and that you're also allowed to talk about a lot of different subject matters.
Hmm.
And I mean, you can make a film that's just purely entertaining, but you can also make a film that touches on some really important, significant uh, subject matter. That. So yeah, I feel like this is one of a handful of films in my early life that had a big impact on me in a lot of different ways. There's been a handful of films where I've just been like, yeah, this was one of those films that just expanded my understanding of what a director could be and what a film could be,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
that you could do it. The proverbial you, that anyone, all of us, any of us could do it.
Hmm.
So yeah, it was huge. And then watching the film now, and I'm really surprised. I think a few things that, I probably wouldn't have paid conscious attention to this when I was a kid, although I certainly would have been impacted by it. Just the virtuosity, technically, of this film is
Hmm.
something that, one of the things that I think surprised me. And it's, I think, complexity of characterization, and the film's like, confidence to not try to present a lot of nuanced challenges in a really complex for a really complex thing like racism and race relations in the United States.
Yeah. Yeah.
but to not feel compelled to just provide some kind of like pat answer for like here's how we solve it, because I think
Yeah.
that takes
No,
some
exactly.
confidence, and I think a lot of other films try to kind of present some pretty like just overly simplified to the point of often insulting, answers for, racism, like just bring in the great white hope or whatever other number of things that movies often try to do, to present a happy ending, at the end.
Well, I think that's one of my favorite things about the movie. Like one of my favorite moments
Yeah.
is when the credits start to roll and you have the quote from Martin Luther King scroll by, and you sort of think like, I'm surprised that he's taking like a really kind of concrete stance on this. And then as it goes up, then you get the
That you get the converse.
contrasting quote from
Or,
Malcolm X.
yeah.
And it becomes this really, really genius point that brings me back to our discussion about Last Temptation, where Scorsese's talking about that it's not about providing the audience with answers and preaching to them. It's
Yeah.
about eliciting conversation. I'm sure that Spike Lee very likely has an opinion of his own that maybe leans one way or the other more so. And yet I think he's more interested in getting these conclusions. A conclusion is always going to be more powerful when someone comes to it on their own after having thought about it, as opposed to having been specifically told this is what's right and this is what's wrong. And I think that that really is the genius of this movie. And the tone works so well with it too. I'm going to compare it to another movie too, because this is a more odd comparison, but it's actually something similar that I said way back when we did this movie. But it reminds me in its tonal shift, sort of reminds me of Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid.
Oh,
And
okay, yeah, I wasn't expecting that. Okay, I'm curious.
Because Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid is quite a lighthearted movie where like it's dealing with sure violence and things like that, but it kind of does so in this tongue-in-cheek kind of like you don't really feel like anyone's going to get hurt in it until the moment when Butch makes his first kill. And that is when there's this massive tonal shift, and it can be a really difficult thing to pull off because you're suddenly going from this like kind of tongue-in-cheek, like the violence isn't really consequential, to suddenly the character feels the consequences of that. And when it's so far into a movie, it can be really difficult to pull that off successfully and not kind of make an audience feel either alienated or just have it be jarring and kind of be like, where'd this come from? And this movie does it in the same way, where the subject matter is treated sincerely and with so much nuance, and yet it's heightened and it's humorous and
stylized.
It's poking fun at a lot of the like really strong convictions that a lot of these characters have, not in a mocking way, but kind of in just this way of like, it's just kind of heightening it to the point of ridiculous in a sense. And then you get to the culmination of the tension and the boil in this movie, and then it becomes really real, and it becomes very stark and very dramatic. And this movie also pulls it off, I think, really, really well.
Interesting.
With the riot at the end, where it goes from this fantastic tone of like this almost advertisement like tone, and the color is rich, and the lenses are wide, and it reminds me a lot of advertising from this era, and especially into the 90s, which I'm sure were also heavily influenced by this, very likely. Like when I was growing up, a lot of ads still kind of had that like super wide angle, really, really saturated color palette kind of style in it. And in doing so, it portrays this world as, again, this like very, very heightened, but not simplistic, kind of like almost, this is going to be a weird comparison, because, and I don't mean it in a demeaning way, but like almost a Sesame Street kind of thing, where it's like, because I think actually, like, I really do respect Sesame Street a lot, weirdly enough, for the way that it approaches its complex.
You're making some interesting parallels here.
Well, yeah, but I mean, it's one of these things where it plays up a lot of the anger and the tension and the characterization, I think, to drive the point home of how big these things feel to the people on the ground. And so it plays up at that, and it uses humor to kind of play those things up. And then when the proverbial shit hits the fan, suddenly again, you really feel it because of that, because you're like, it suddenly kind of grounds you and snaps you out and brings you back into reality, which I think is a brilliant move.
Well, I mean, I think, I think too, just to add to some of what you're saying, but I kind of want to come back here and work our way to this point as we discuss
Mhm.
other aspects of the film. But I mean, what I get a sense of is a vibrancy of a community, right? I
Yeah,
mean, and
yeah.
I think these technical choices that you're calling out specifically, the vibrancy of the color palette that you used in the film, and some of the lens choices and the kineticism of the camera and other things, and it's also in the writing and it's in the performances, is that I mean, I get a sense of an extremely vibrant community.
Mhm,
We get to meet a lot of different characters in the community, and even the characters that we might not get to spend a ton of time with, they're still drawn in a way that we understand them. And I think Spike Lee is extremely sympathetic to all of his characters, right? And to every character, there's some sympathy, at least somewhere, which I think is important. And so it's a vibrancy that we're shown in this community, and I think when we get to the point where Radio Raheem is killed, right, and we have, he comes into the pizza joint, into Sal's, and they have a confrontation, and Sal smashes his boombox, and I think that's, the point where the film does really change in its tone.
mhm.
And then, of course, when Radio Raheem is killed by the police, then obviously very clearly the tone has changed. And then we have the destruction of the pizza parlor in response to that murder. And so you see almost the vibrancy of that community kind of drained
Mhm.
by this really horrible event. But then we have kind of a denouement, and in kind of the remains and the rubble of that event, we see the vibrancy start to creep back in again
Mhm.
as we leave the film, as the credits begin to roll, as you described. So I think those choices, at least my kind of, the way I kind of felt it, was such a vibrant, living community, is kind of the vibe that I got from the culmination of all of those technical aspects. So
Mhm.
let's
Yeah.
talk about that a little more then, like, because I think there are some extremely strong choices directorially here, and I think we could talk about that a little more. I mean, again, this is what I was surprised by. I mean, there are some really just extraordinary shots here. I really appreciate this film has almost none of the traditional, over the shoulder,
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm like, oh, thank you. It's like I feel so just, almost everything we see today seems to be, especially with television, which is supposed to be quote unquote more cinematic today. And I would argue that in a lot of ways it's not actually. And unfortunately, it has influenced a lot of films, a lot of
Mhm.
cinema.
Yeah.
I think more things look like television now than they ever had. And what that means to me is that you just see, two people talking over the shoulder, over the shoulder.
Just
It's like
coverage.
just is 80% of the entire show. And we
Yeah.
see almost none of that here. And we see these really, often there's a lot of camera movement. We see a lot of reframing within a shot. There's some really interesting oneers that actually hardly even stand out to you, because they
Mhm.
almost seem like they're multiple shots edited
Well,
together,
yeah,
because
there's multiple setups within them, right?
because
And so
there's
it's yeah.
it's beautiful, and like we'd already talked about, that there's really some beautiful kind of tableaus we have. And it's interesting, it's almost like, and I don't want to say that Spike Lee is like Wes Anderson at all, but there's almost like this kind of this theatrical, nature that you kind of talk about, where there's almost this like a like the Greek chorus of the three
Mhm.
men
Yeah.
sitting on the sidewalk in front of the bright red wall. There's a really beautiful moment where, which I thought, it's one of the shots that I think is most just really strikingly beautiful, is when Ossie Davis's character, the mayor, is talking to Ruby Dee's character, and he's standing in front of this beautiful silhouette of the city with the
Mm-hmm.
blue sky and all, and the buildings totally blacked out in silhouette. And it's actually, and I don't know if they used a rain machine or if it was actually some, raining, but there's just this light rain behind him. It's just extraordinarily beautiful. There's
Mm-hmm.
so much beauty in this. And that I had forgotten a lot of that was in it, or maybe I'd kind of missed it, or just didn't know how to articulate it. But a lot of that I was really surprised. I mean, it's like so so beautifully shot in so
Well, it's
many
so
ways.
specific too. I mean, it's like it's one of those things where you really have a sense of Spike Lee's prowess as a filmmaker when these moments can feel so natural and improvised, and they're not, and that he can
Right.
give this feeling of, like, again, this reframing a camera in the middle of action or in the middle of conversation,
Mm,
and it feels like the camera is just finding the
yeah.
new
Finding the
position, and
moment.
yet it
Finding the
is
moment. Yeah.
clearly, because of how precise it is, it's clearly something that's planned. But to make those things feel natural and feel like they belong in a scene is really, really
Well, and especially
impressive.
on a $6 million budget. I
Yeah,
mean, and shooting on location. This
yeah,
stuff is tough. I
yeah.
mean, to get this at that, even in '89, $6 million is not a ton of money, and to get this on location where you've got, I mean, it's, as far as I understand, the entire film was shot on location.
Yeah, yeah,
I mean, I think they built a pizzeria that wasn't something, I think, that was pre-existing because they had to destroy it. I'm not 100% sure if they built the structure or just the interior, but um, I mean, it's extremely difficult because you've got so many variables that are so kind of out of your control. I mean, you can't control the weather, the sun, obviously, um, and there's all kinds of stuff going on around you.
Well,
And
even
so I think
one
it's
thing that,
even more impressive just given that.
yes, yeah, and one thing that really that stuck out to me immediately, like within the first shot of the movie, is how much I miss directors and cinematographers being this stylized. Because I mean, the first thing you
Yeah.
see is this street, and you just think this feels hot, like, just without any other context.
Mm,
The fact that they've clearly got some sort of, like, a warm filter over it, and they've processed the film to be definitely a warmer hue, and it's kind of blooming and a little bit overexposed, and it just feels hot, and it contrasts so much with kind of what you were saying earlier, about, like, you look at the vast majority of mainstream film and television these days, and everything has to be exposed perfectly, properly. It's all going to be, framed with, like, the rule of thirds. Um, like, this day and age, if you were making a movie like this where it's set during a heat wave and stuff, you wouldn't see nearly this level. I mean, with exceptions, obviously. Of course, there are excellent DPs and directors still working today, but in terms of just, like, your standard fare, you wouldn't see nearly this amount of effort just put into the look alone of making it feel hot and making you sweat just
well,
looking at
that's
the
and
image.
that's such a key part of the story too. It's
Yeah,
this,
yeah.
right. We have a day in the life. Basically, it's like kind of a slice of life of this neighborhood, and really everything is kind of centered around taking us in this day to this climactic horrific event.
Hmm.
And the heat is like that. It's kind of true realistically, where historically you have extremely high temperatures in a city. There tends to be more violence, which people
Hmm.
just get it's just
You get
people get
irate.
impatient. You get impatient, you're uncomfortable, people's tempers are shorter. But it serves so well to kind of create this pressure cooker, or even turn up the heat um on what is already kind of a boiling kettle, kind of ready to go. um and yeah, I mean, I think there's so many choices that work so well in that. But you talk about style and not being afraid to really lean into that. I mean, with it's just exploding with personality, and
Hmm.
it's really wonderful to experience as an audience. I mean, whether it's like Sam Jackson's character, who's kind of, it's almost part of a Greek chorus kind of narrator. His radio DJ. You've got the three men sitting out kind of a more traditional Greek chorus. you've got these fourth wall breaks. You've got this like beautiful moment where Radio
Mother
Raheem
Sister
is like
2.
love, hate, you
Mhm.
know, and it's almost, and it's like this poetry, you know, it's almost like we're just going to stop and we're going to break the fourth wall. And we've got this, you know, this monologue, that this poetic monologue that was really beautifully done. You've got the fourth wall break when we just like go from character to character, kind of, you know, just spitting as fast as possible, like all these like racial slurs they could possibly, you know, think of, right?
Yeah.
And it works because it's just you could so easily destroy a film by doing something like that, but it works so wonderfully in this film, so well executed. As part of, like you say, we've already got kind of the expectation is set that this is going to be heightened and stylized, but it also, everything flows right into where Lee is taking us. You never feel like you're not in good hands, right?
Yeah.
Like you always feel as an audience that you're in good hands here, and that it's not going to go astray. And it's the writing is so crisp, the performances are so excellent, and the way he weaves these even highly stylized moments into the story, and they contribute to the characterization and they contribute to the tone that you talked about.
Well, he does
I had
something
never
that's
seen stuff like that. I don't think, I'm trying to
yeah.
think, like when I first saw this film, I don't know that I'd ever seen. I mean, I've tried. I mean, I can't go. You know, it's so long ago. I mean, this is even if I had seen something like this fourth wall breaking, I can't remember. Like this is the only one that actually stands out in my mind. If I even ever did see it done somewhere else,
Mhm.
because it's done so well here, right? Um, and I had never seen anything like that. I'm like,
Well, he
what?
does
You
something
can
that's
look
really
into the
smart, I
camera,
think,
like
though,
you can.
too, which is that in the opening credits, he presents the image of the women dancing on a backdrop of brownstones,
Mhm.
not real brownstones, and so you
Oh,
immediately
and
have
Rosie
this like
Perez. What you mean
stage
in the
like
credit,
theatricality? Yeah,
the opening
yeah,
credit sequence when Rosie Perez is dancing?
yes, yeah,
Right.
yeah.
Okay. Yep.
And so you get this sense of theatricality immediately,
Hmm.
and I think even beyond that, like going back to Radio Raheem's monologue, um, what that makes like that brings my mind to the fact that in a stage production, you don't you can't cut from a character being in a scene to suddenly delivering some fourth wall break uh somewhere else. Like you can't
Hmm.
cut like that. And so I think Spike Lee does something really, really neat, which is that you actually have Radio Raheem um, talking like in a conversation in a two
Yep.
shot,
Yep.
and
Yep.
then the
Yep.
camera steps over into the like receiving end of that conversation's
Right. Like
place,
where the
and
yeah
we
where the character
hear his
was.
monologue head on, point of view, like he's looking straight at camera.
Yeah.
And I think that that's really, really, that part always, like I almost had forgotten that happened that way, and it like kind of blew me away this time because of the way that it just happens so fluidly, and suddenly we're being talked to and there's not even like time to question it. It
Yeah.
just is so confident in its ability to do so and
Mm.
to take that step. And it just feels so theatrical in this way that I think is a really, really strong bridge between like there's oftentimes there's these movies that people always talk about that are like, oh, it's like a stage play, it's like theatrical, and because it's just like people talking in a room or something, whatever.
Right.
um and I find that stuff always kind of bores me a little bit unless it's like incredibly well done, because it's not taking advantage of the medium in which it's in. It's just
Right.
trying to sort of recreate another medium.
Yep.
This is taking inspiration from theater, but adapting it to the medium that it's in, and adapting it well, and using the advantages of film and the language of film to kind of evolve those elements. And I think that really, really stuck out to me, especially this time, as something that makes this feel completely unique. And I'm with you in that I don't think I've seen like fourth wall breaks like this really ever, like in anything predating this. And I definitely don't think I've seen them done as well since.
Yeah.
I think that people have kind of picked up on that and tried to kind of do that style. I mean, this movie is a greatly influential movie for still to this day. Um, but I don't think that anyone's ever quite nailed it like
I
Spike Lee
mean, at
does
least
here.
I can't think of anything off the top of my head. Maybe there is, but it escapes me now. I couldn't think of a film that does it better than this one. So,
Hmm.
yeah, if other people have examples, you can email us. But I can't think of any off the top of my head. And all of this, I mean, there's even there's this throughout the entire film. We've got Dutch angles all over the place.
Yeah,
I think you had
yeah.
mentioned, the wide angles, lenses, and it's just there's so much going on. Um, and I guess that's why the feeling I get is just this kinetic, vibrant. People are all constantly on the move. People, Radio Rakim is in the background walking from one place to the other in this with the radio. We've got Smiley coming in and out of scenes. I mean, there's this
The mayor's
just
always kind of stumbling around
and I
somewhere.
don't and I know it's like we pick these things apart sometimes in films, um, but I think it's important. It's what we do here is to kind of sometimes we get really nitty gritty because I think it's it helps evaluate the film. It's kind of it helps you give greater insight. We don't want to obviously lose the forest for the trees, but one of the most amazing shots that I can remember this time. There's this really exceptional scene where Sal is talking to Toro. Is that Pino? I can't remember.
No, Vito is Totoro, I think.
Okay,
Yeah.
sorry,
Yeah.
sorry. So yeah, you've got Sal's talking to his son, and we're pushing in, we're pushing in. It's like a dolly in. I think we might even go like over a table. They're inside the
Hmm.
restaurant, right? And there's this big
Sitting
picture
next to the
window,
window.
which is gonna be where I think Mookie throws the trash can, later at the end of the film.
Yeah.
But we've got this deep focus. We can see everything. We see the Korean convenience store across the street in the background, just off out of the scene, but we can hear, and so sound is used so well here too. So the focus is on this conversation. They're sitting across from each other at this table. We dolly in, dolly in, dolly in. We come in close, and now we're looking outside the window. Conversation still going on. Deep focus. We can see the Korean store owners behind us. There's life is going on. We see one of the guys who were sitting in front of the red wall, comes into frame, buys a beer, leaves. There's people moving. Then Smiley comes in and bangs on the glass behind them. Now the scene, moves outside. Totoro goes outside, trying to shoo Smiley away. We have
But the
interaction.
camera stays in, right?
The
Like
camera's right
yeah.
there, and it's just it's such a confident use of depth. And I think we've talked about this before, where we don't see a lot of storytelling and depth much anymore, but the coordination of all those elements and of the sound design and it's taking such care to build this community and to show it spatially and to have a continuity of characters coming and going and being a part of things, I think is a huge part of the success of this film.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I think it's so effective when we build up to the place where that vibrancy is so sadly drained when we have these, everything comes to a head, and we have Radio Rakim killed, and we have the destruction of the pizza parlor.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm sorry. I think I got in a little rabbit hole there on that scene because it was just so amazing.
That's a great scene, though.
It's just such a, and there are so many like it. But I think when it's interesting. I think when the film was released, this was especially interesting. I guess I'm going to like jump for a second to something else here. But on the Blu-ray that I have, there was this movie premiered at Cannes, and there was, I guess, like the Q&A after the screening was on the Blu-ray. And so I took some time to watch that. and it was especially interesting. I was a couple of things that stood out to me that I noticed was one, I was surprised by the the how to say this, like the lack of thoughtfulness that was in most of the questions that were asked. I've never been to con, and I don't watch a lot of interviews or like Q&As and things from con, so I'm not quite sure like what the the standard is, like the average is for the caliber of questions that are asked by the press there. I'm not sure, but you would think, I guess, most of these people were press from like the entertainment section or the cinema. They were cinema. They were supposed to be cinema oriented, right? It wasn't like there were just general reporters there. Like these are supposed to be people
like
who,
entertainment reporters for
or even
variety
specifically film.
yeah.
Not just entertainment, but like actual cinema.
Yeah.
And so I was kind of surprised by, or let down, frankly, by the general caliber of questions that were asked. And, nobody there that I at least remember talked about any of the things that we're talking about here, which is the virtuosity of the filmmaking itself, of all of these elements and how well they've been put together to tell a story. But it was also interesting to notice that a lot of people seem to be focused on the fear that this film would instigate violence in Black audiences. And being so young, I don't remember that being a part of the conversation when I was, when this film first came out, because I was so young. And maybe I was exposed to some of that, and I just don't remember. But it was very clear in this Q&A that took place at Cannes after the premiere that was obviously a thing, and apparently that was a thing pretty widespread.
Yeah.
And it's interesting that I guess that overtook so much of the conversation away from, even away from like the fact that the message of, Radio Rakim being killed by police. People just seem to a lot of people seem to go straight to the fact that the pizza parlor, that there was a riot there, which is interesting and telling, I think. But also that there was,
it actually kind of involves itself in the movie where at the end there's like the little radio report about the mayor coming to, like the real mayor coming to visit, and they say we will not stand for property violence.
Yeah. Okay.
No mention of
the
no
murder,
mention
of the police violence, right?
Yeah.
Which is obviously something that still happens to this day here in this country.
Yeah.
But I guess I almost want, I guess I was just surprised that, unlike many films, it seems like there was not much conversation about the skill and the talent and that's in this film as a film itself, So, but it was interesting that was, and I'm glad that was included, because I think it was important to see a slice of kind of what people were thinking and how they were responding to this film in its time.
Yeah, and to also put into context, like Spike Lee's frustration to this day with those things too. Like he still talks about the fact that it really, really bothered him, and still bothers him to this day, that there was this kind of infantilization of like, can people handle this? Can people
but specifically,
I think a great
can
thing
Black
that he
people
says,
handle this?
Yes,
is what
exactly.
The question was. Yeah,
and a great thing that he says too is that he's like, you never hear this about, is Rambo going to cause people coming out of the theater killing people, right? So
very, very rarely, at least at a much less level, for sure. Which is, and I can only imagine how frustrating that would be as a filmmaker, to have, to pour your heart and soul into something, and to have the message, so like, to have your work kind of just, totally pushed aside, and have the focus be put on something so insulting.
Yeah.
Well,
I think that also, I think that also is probably a good point to get into. Like, I think we both kind of talked about this a little bit, about these two characters of Radio Raheem and Smiley, and kind of their representation in the film, and what they mean, because we were sort of discussing this, these elements of different characters beforehand, of like the Greek chorus, and that you've got all these characters weaving in and out. And of course, Radio Raheem has his monologue about love and hate, which is very similar, and I think intentionally so, to the Night of the Hunter monologue, where you've got the Knuckles, and it's kind of like a play on that in a lot of ways. And I think Spike Lee has talked about that.
Say a little more. I'm not familiar with it.
So Night of the Hunter is a movie from, God, what is it? Trying to think of what year that was. 55, I believe, by Charles Laughton, and it was his only feature film ever. And it's this movie that like people kind of describe as this like incredible thriller that is also like has so much depth and just a very, very masterful movie, and they're always surprised that it was his only feature, I think, because...
And what is the moment that you're...
So in it, Robert Mitchum plays the villain, who is I can't remember if he's a real preacher or if he's pretending to be a preacher, but he's got tattooed on his fingers, on like just above his knuckles, love and hate. So similarly to Radio Raheem, who is obviously wearing, rings.
Yep.
He has these things, and he has a similar monologue where it's like love and hate are always intertwined, and he does the hand thing.
He even does the he intertwines his hands. I didn't know that.
But I think the way that Spike Lee is playing with it here is that, of course, Robert Mitchum is playing the villain in that film and describing these, whereas Radio Raheem is kind of playing a little bit more of I don't want to say like prophetic, but he is kind of almost describing the events that will carry out later on in the film, very much in part due to like his own circumstances and what happens with him in the film. But I do find that those characters, Smiley and Radio Raheem, are really interesting too, because at least, and this is speculation on my part, but the way that I see those two characters is that
that's always speculation. We're always just speculating.
Of course, yeah. That's what all these discussions are. Unless we had Spike Lee here, which he said that he was busy today. So but I think that those two characters are really interesting because they kind of are like these two different sides of the same coin, in that they both kind of flow through the movie without necessarily interacting directly with the drama. They're sort of these wanderers in a way, like Smiley will come in for a moment and say something about his pictures of Malcolm X and MLK, but is kind of, waved off by characters. And in the most dramatic waving off, of course, is John Turturro as Vito, really like essentially shoving him away and I think making him upset, which I think sort of instigates his involvement in the kind of boycott at the end. And then you've also got Radio Raheem, who is kind of portrayed as this like kind of nonchalant, like kind of wise in a way, like he's kind of like a good orator, and he's walking around with his music playing, but he's never really directly involved in the conflicts or in the character drama. He's kind of always just like wandering through these scenes as sort of a constant. And I think that it's interesting that the climax of the film occurs when, of course, Ray Raheem's boombox is smashed by Sal, and then the climax even heightens further when Radio Raheem is killed, and then the climax heightens even further when Smiley lights the pizza parlor on fire. And to me, I mean, at least my takeaway for what these characters are kind of representing in those moments is just that there's this like underlying current through the film, this tension that is being ignored and shoved off by everyone and kind of just not acknowledged, despite the fact that they are saying, like, again, Radio Raheem is saying very profound things that it seems like nobody, minus maybe a few characters, are really listening to. And same with Smiley. He's basically describing in his own way the kind of the same thing that Spike Lee is trying to describe with the movie, which is just this love and hate, this like violence versus nonviolence. And it's the first thing he does when of course the picture is,
or maybe not even verses. It's really,
the symbiosis almost of the two, right?
Yeah.
And so you have this really, I think, like, again, this is just my take on it, but I think this really not cathartic, but cathartic in like a storytelling kind of sense, where you see these seeds being planted throughout the movie, and these characters, and you're kind of wondering like, how are these going to come into play by the end? And then of course, what a great representation of what's gone on this whole time, where people have just been kind of like, and what's the whole thing with Sal and Mookie the whole time are both sort of in a similar way. Like Sal keeps kind of shaking off the fact that he's like, no, I like this neighborhood. I want to be here. I want to like, this is where I've built up this place my whole life.
Well, he
even though
literally
Vito
says he's
keeps-
like, I've seen the kids grow up.
Yeah, and like
They've
Vito
grown
keeps
up on
trying
my
to Vito,
food, and I've
who's
seen the old people get older. I've seen the young people grow old, and I've like they've grown up on my food.
Yeah, and in the same way, like Mookie is kind of this bridge between that too, where he's like he's sort of ignoring the potential problems that are going on around him, and these potential boiling points, just in the same way that he sort of like is trying to temporarily relieve the heat when he's with his girlfriend and he's using the ice cubes and kind of rubbing them all over her body. He's like relieving the pressure without actually getting to the root cause, which I find is really interesting. And then of course it explodes, and it, to me, is very representative of this idea that people will always kind of say, like, when things like this explode, when there's these massive moments of, I think the famous quote is like, you know, history doesn't happen at all, and then all history happens in a week or something like that. I might be butchering that a little bit, but this kind of naive thinking that like, well, where did this come from? Like, how did this happen? How did this occur? And yet you have these things occurring the entire time in just the periphery of everyone that they're just ignoring and they're not listening to and they're not paying attention to. So I think that, at least in my takeaway, like the movie is doing a really, really great job of, again, not providing these answers and not saying like, here's this right or wrong, that, you know, violent reaction to something like oppression is bad. But nonviolence is also, you know, ineffectual or things like that. It's in fact just kind of asking, what do you think? Kind of playing off of like the imperfect, like there is no right answer. There is no, like life is way too complicated to expect there to be some sort of simple solution to the world's problems. And I don't think it's saying that either in a pessimistic way. It's in fact saying it in a really just
matter of fact,
critical, matter of fact, like interrogative way of like, how can we kind of interact with those sort of elements in our lives and deal with these problems. So it's really, really, I think, interesting and has so much to say, and doesn't hide it too. Like, it's not subtle with that, and I think in a very smart way. It's very bold with its portrayal of these issues, and I think Spike's own thoughts.
No, it's right up front. Yeah, no, it's not afraid to be right up front. It's not afraid to hide what it's about. And nor should it be. Powerful film, and I feel like I'm glad that we had this discussion. I was like particularly interested to hear your kind of your take on Radio Rakim and Smiley. Not that there are any 100% right answers or wrong answers, but I kind of, in watching the film, was trying to kind of suss out my own opinions and thoughts. And, like there are so many things in this film that are emotionally impactful. They're effective, right? That I'm not able to immediately articulate exactly why, which is one of the things that I love doing this podcast with you about, because it's like in the discussion, right? Like in the actual conversation that we're having in real time. Like, I often am able to find my way around to a better understanding, and I'm better able to articulate my own kind of thoughts and feelings and kind of why something impacted me the way it did. As I think it's so interesting, Smiley that character wasn't even written into the script. That was kind of something that was put in after the fact, when the actor kept going to Spike Lee saying, hey, I want a part in the film. I want a part in your film. And Spike Lee finally relented, and they kind of found a way to create Smiley together and to have that be a part of the film. And I think it's so interesting that he opens the film and he closes the film basically.
Yeah.
He's kind of
Yeah.
bookends the film, and of course, like you've mentioned, he's throughout the film at different points in time, and so yeah, there are, I still don't know exactly why I kind of am impacted the way I am, but there's so many elements in that film that I think work in that way. I mean, we could certainly analyze them intellectually, which we've done in quite a few ways here, but they're also just effective. They're just plain effective emotionally, and I think that also sadly is missing from a lot of things that I see,
Yes.
in
Yeah.
in films. And I think you had said, and I'm curious, I want to make sure I heard this right. Did you say that it was like Spike Lee wrote the script in only 2 weeks? Is that
Yeah,
something that you had
apparently in a
read,
Rolling
or?
Stone interview, he says that, yeah, he wrote the movie in 2 weeks, which is crazy.
I mean, and I don't know to what extent, there was an editing, who knows? I mean,
Yeah.
maybe he wrote a draft in 2 weeks, but then he spent months editing it. I have no idea. It would be so interesting, and I'm going to go out there and look to see if he's, spoken more explicitly about, his writing process and how, and specifically with this film. But like again, we're just speculating. But I'll just speculate. I mean, I wonder how much of this was like how he writes. I'm not sure if a lot of this was just kind of like bubbling up from the subconscious, that he opened himself up as a writer to have these elements in the film, without like a hyper intellectualized, route to it, if that makes sense,
Yeah.
where it was like, well, just kind of just, I don't know. I'm always interested in that, for every piece of writing. It's something that I've been kind of curious about for a while as I try to work on my own writing process, which is kind of this balance of, writing from kind of the shoulders up, where you're kind of intellectual about it and you're conscious about it. And it's kind of, versus kind of writing from a more subconscious place where it's more kind of visceral and coming from kind of like a dream-like place of your subconscious, and how how do you kind of get the best of both worlds. So yeah, total speculation. I mean, I have no idea, how he writes, and especially how he wrote this script, but it would be interesting to kind of learn more about it. But from an audience perspective, at least, to me, it feels like there was a lot of room for that kind of subconscious to work. And because you could take all these elements independently, and it would be like, how is this going to work in a film? We're going to have characters speaking, breaking the fourth wall, speaking to the camera. We're going to have these, stops where we kind of have monologues. We're going to have, this character who stutters, bookend it. We're going to have, this guy that's walking around with a boombox, and he, aside from his monologue, he's got Public Enemy's Fight the Power, just kind of playing throughout the film, walking in and out of scenes. You know what I mean? It's like, I think about this as from the perspective of a writer, and I'm like, oh my gosh, he allowed for so much creativity, but it was still yet cohesive and emotionally effective and impactful. It's just rare. It's what makes this a masterpiece in my mind.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
So I don't know if any of that made sense. That I'm like,
No,
sometimes
totally.
I'm afraid I'm like rambling.
Well,
here,
like you
but...
said, sometimes it's fun to just, it allows, I think that I totally echo that sentiment of like, this lets, the great thing about doing this is that I can sometimes realize things about what we're talking about as we talk about them, and it makes it a lot of fun.
The only last thing that I want to kind of think about is, before we will end this episode, is that this film is, I mean, Spike Lee was 32, is still pretty young. It's his third film, and there's so much energy, right? We see so many bold choices from a technical perspective, but all in the writing, I mean, everywhere. And I think other filmmakers that we've kind of touched on, like maybe Paul Thomas Anderson comes to mind with his second film, Boogie Nights, is also very kinetic, and there's so much going on with the camera and so much movement. And there are other, I can't think of others off the top of my mind, but it does kind of seem to be a bit of a trend where we have directors in their earlier films have so much of this same type of kind of energy, for lack of a better word, and as they mature and get older, you kind of see them, and sometimes we kind of term it confident, But to kind of play devil's advocate, I almost, as they, sorry to finish my thought, like they become kind of more confident and the camera becomes kind of stiller and wider, and we kind of have scenes unfold in front of a camera that's very still, and we lose a lot of that kinetic activity, and I almost wonder, is that a bad thing in some ways? Like I almost wonder, why is that? And is it automatically necessarily a movement to a quote unquote maturity? I don't know. What are your thoughts on that? Because I feel like this is another instance. Now, I mean, I think one of the latest films that I've seen of Spike Lee's was Black Klansman, which I thought was fantastic. And it's still a lot of energy and style in that film, but it's quite a bit different than
yeah.
not
I mean, it's interesting.
and of course
really,
it
it's
should
something
be,
that
but
I've
I think
thought
you
about
get my
a
gist.
lot.
Yeah.
Yeah, like I where you have oftentimes people who are really, really either kinetic or hyper stylized in their youth. Like even like someone like Spielberg, who has, I think, retained a lot of his like signature kind of camera movement, but also at the same time has obviously matured as a filmmaker and tackled a whole bunch of different subject matter. And so I think like, I don't know, it's like good thing or bad thing. It's hard to say because I think that
See, these are questions that I wish people would ask at those
yeah, well, I mean,
like
when
Q
I
and
think
A's.
about when I think about that, I think Scorsese said something recently about it when he was doing an interview for Killers of the Flower Moon, where he kind of said like he's done that, like he's played that
you've
side
been
of him
there.
out, and at this point he's not necessarily.
It's about the
Like
story.
he
Does it
kind
just
of
become-
laughed about it, where he said like I'm not necessarily interested in even making a successful movie at this point. I'm interested in experimenting with the form as much as I can, which is, I think that is kind of an interesting comment too, because I would say that in a lot of ways, a lot of their earlier works, at least in my opinion, tend to be the more experimental ones anyhow.
Yeah.
But I mean, I can totally.
I guess
understand
that's
the
what I'm
sentiment
kind of saying.
Yeah,
that's what I'm kind of saying. I guess is that, and obviously we can't speak for Spike Lee or Scorsese or anyone else, but yeah, it's just, I guess it's just a curious. I guess I will. I'll kind of be one of those
It'll be a
things
thing
where
to
we ask the
ponder.
questions and there may not be answers that we have here, but it was just a question that it's kind of something I think you see amongst a lot of filmmakers as they age and as they have more films under their belt, and it's just interesting to me. As a filmmaker myself, I'm kind of always like, well, geez, does that mean if I made a film that was kinetic and had a lot of these elements in it, does that mean it's an immature film?
yeah, no, exactly. I think that's it's an interesting thing to ponder, and I think it's something that's kind of carried through a lot of our conversations too, as you sort of said, with like PTA and
some others
things. So
hey, and you know what? It's just there may not be an answer.
Well, there you go. Generational differences. It's our motif here. So.
Well, all right. Well, Cullen, it's been a pleasure to discuss Do the Right Thing with you. I've really enjoyed it, and to everybody out there, I hope that you enjoyed our conversation as well. Of course, if you've not seen the film, you absolutely should. It's truly a fantastic film, and it's as relevant today, in some ways, quite sadly, as it was when it was released. So still as poignant as it ever was, and maybe more so. But until next time, everyone, we'll catch you later.
Yeah. Bye bye.